It had conquered 200 star systems over the span of 3,000 years. No species had ever resisted them for more than a few days. Their fleet darkened the skies of countless worlds, and their soldiers marched through the ruins of civilizations that once thought themselves powerful. Commander Al stood on the bridge of his flagship and watched the blue planet grow larger on the viewing screen. Earth looked peaceful and fragile, like all the others before it. Felt nothing but contempt for whatever primitive creatures lived on its surface. Gray Mitch stood in the command center of Earth's orbital defense station and studied the incoming data with steady eyes. The Deep Space Monitoring Network had detected the fleet 3 days ago. 3,000 warships were heading toward the Sol system at speeds that should have been impossible. Grace had served in the military for 30 years, and she had never seen anything like this. Humanity had only achieved interstellar travel 15 years ago. Fleet numbered 90 vessels, and most of those were small frigates designed for exploration rather than combat. Daniel Price addressed the United Earth Defense Council through a secure channel. His voice remained calm even as he delivered the grim news. The aliens had not responded to any communication attempts. Their trajectory made it clear they were coming directly for Earth. Every government on the planet had agreed to unite under emergency protocols, setting aside centuries of conflict in the fate of extinction. Daniel looked at the faces on his screen and saw fear in most of them. But he also saw determination. Sat in the command chair of the destroyer Defiance and watched his crew work at their station. They were staying near Jupiter on a routine patrol when the first ships appeared. Was 34 years old, and he had joined the Space Navy because he wanted to explore the stars. He never imagined he would be fighting for the survival of his species. The ships were sleek and black, covered in strange symbols that pulsed with dim light. Moved with a grace that made human vessels look clumsy by comparison. Sin that would change the course of history. Instead of retreating and reporting, he ordered his small squadron of 5 ships to engage the enemy. His officers looked at him with shock, but they followed his commands without hesitation. The Defiant accelerated toward the nearest ship, while the other vessels spread out to flank the remaining targets. He knew they might all die in the next few minutes. Also knew that someone had to show these invaders that humanity would not simply roll over and accept destruction. It lasted less than 10 minutes, but it felt like an eternity to everyone involved. Used the asteroid field to his advantage, hiding behind massive rocks and striking when the enemy least expected it. His weapons officer fired at the ship's engines, crippling its ability to maneuver. The alien vessel tried to turn and fight, but was already behind it. A direct hit to its reactor core caused the ship to explode in a brilliant flash of light. Squadron destroyed a sentence out before the remaining 3 retreated at incredible speed. Raoul received the report with disbelief. No species had ever fought back during first contact. The primitive humans should have fled or surrendered, begging for mercy like every other race before them. Instead, they had attacked the scouts and destroyed 2 of them. Al felt a small flicker of irritation, but he dismissed it quickly. These humans were simply too ignorant to understand their situation. Once they saw the full might of the Armada, they would break like all the ordered the invasion fleet to continue toward Earth while slowing down. So watched the footage of the battle near Jupiter and felt something she had not expected. Pride. 5 small ships had faced an unknown enemy and chosen to fight rather than flee. She knew Captain from his academy days. He had always been stubborn and unconventional, the kind of officer who frustrated his superior but inspired his crews. Now his actions had given humanity something precious. Treating scouts would need to report back to their fleet, and the delay could be measured in hours or even days. Price went on every broadcast channel to address the people of Earth. He did not hide the truth from them. A powerful alien empire was coming to conquer or destroy their world. The odds were terrible. Many would die in the coming conflict. But he also reminded them of what humanity had achieved throughout its history. They had survived ice ages and plagues. They had rebuilt after devastating wars. They had clawed their way from caves to the stars through sheer determination and refusal to accept defeat. He asked them to hold on to that spirit now, when they needed it most. As across the planet began preparing for the worst, families moved to underground shelters that had been built during the threat of nuclear war decades ago. Factories switched from producing consumer goods to manufacturing weapons and defensive equipment. Young people lined up at recruitment centers, wanting to do something rather than simply wait for death. The fear was real and overwhelming, but so was the anger. These aliens thought they could simply take Earth without a fight. They were wrong. Mitchell addressed the combined fleet through a channel that reached every ship in the system. She acknowledged the impossible odds they faced. She admitted that many of them would not survive the coming battle, but she also told them that they were fighting for something worth dying for. Every person on Earth, every child and parent and friend, was counting on them to stand firm. They might not win the war, but they would make the enemy remember the name of humanity. To the Admiral's speech and looked at his crew. He saw the same fear in their eyes that he felt in his own heart, but he also saw something else. Resolve. They had already proven that they could hurt the enemy. Now they just had to do it again and again until they understood that Earth was not worth the cost. The Defiance turned toward the inner system, ready to join the defensive line that was forming around their homeworld. The first battle was over. The real war was about to begin. It arrived at Mars like a dark cloud spreading across the sky. 3,000 warships took positions around the red planet, blocking every route and cutting off all communication with Earth. Mars was home to humanity's largest off-world colonies, where 2 million people lived in domed cities built into the rust-colored landscape. The shipyards orbiting the planet produced most of Earth's military vessels. Commander Al knew that taking Mars would cripple humanity's ability to act. Expected the operation to last no more than a week. And Tate stood in the command bunker beneath Olympus colony and studied the tactical display with grim determination. She commanded 12,000 soldiers spread across the Martian surface. Her forces were outnumbered by at least 10 to 1, and the enemy possessed technology that made human weapons look like toys. Amy was 41 years old, and she had spent her entire adult life in the military. She had fought in border conflicts and peacekeeping missions. Nothing had prepared her for this, but she refused to let her soldiers see her out. Sent a message to Earth before beginning his assault. He offered humanity a single chance to surrender. Those who submitted would be allowed to live as servants of the Dominion. Those who resisted would be exterminated without mercy. He had delivered the same ultimatum to dozens of species before, most accepted within hours. The weak ones always chose survival over pride. He waited for the human response with the patience of a predator who knew his prey had nowhere to run. Daniel Price recorded his reply in a small room surrounded by military advisors. His voice was steady and clear as he spoke directly to the alien commander. He acknowledged that humanity was outmatched. He admitted that they might all die in the coming war. Then he said the words that would echo across the galaxy for centuries to come. We were born fighting for survival. We will die the same way. The message ended, and Daniel felt a strange sense of peace. Whatever happened next, he had stolen the truth of his being. Mars began with a bombardment from orbit. Ships fired energy weapons that turned entire sections of the surface to glass. Aim Tate ordered her forces into the underground tunnel network that connected the various colonies. These tunnels had been built for mining operations and transportation. Now they became the backbone of humanity's resistance. The control of the sky, but the ground belonged to Amy and her soldiers. Descended in massive landing craft that disgorged thousands of soldiers onto the Martian surface. They were tall and reptilian, covered in natural armor that made them difficult to kill. Their weapons fired beams of concentrated energy that could cut through steel. They marched toward the human colonies in perfect formation, confident in their superiority. They did not understand what was waiting for them beneath the red soil. Soldiers struck from hidden positions, firing rockets and grenades before disappearing back into the tunnels. They planted explosive charges along the paths they used to move between objectives. They collapsed buildings onto advancing enemy columns. Every meter of ground cost the invader blood. They had never fought an enemy who refused to stand and face them in open battle. They called the humans cowards, but their casualty numbers kept climbing. Commander Sophie Grant piloted her frigate Horizon through the asteroid belt beyond Mars with 30 crew members who had volunteered for a suicide mission. Her orders were simple: disrupt supply lines by any means necessary. Sophie was 29 years old, small in stature but fierce in spirit. She had graduated at the top of her class in tactical training. Now she would put the skills to the ultimate test. Used the countless rocks drifting through space cover, waiting for any cargo vessels to pass within striking range. Her weapons were too weak to damage warships, but supply transports had lighter armor. She destroyed 2 fuel tankers in a single day, then vanished into the asteroid field before the enemy could respond. They sent hunters to find her, but the Horizon was too small and too fast. Sophie became a ghost that haunted their logistic network. Engineer Park worked in a laboratory filled with captured technology. His team had recovered debris from the ship destroyed near Jupiter. Was 36 years old, quiet man who preferred machines to people. He had degrees in physics and engineering from 3 different universities. Now he was racing against time to find something, anything that could help humanity survive. He studied the alien devices for 18 hours a day, sleeping only when his body forced him to stop. Stretched into weeks and then months. Amy Tate lost soldiers every day, but she also inflicted losses that shocked the command. Her guerrilla tactics turned every colony into a death trap for the invader. Al grew increasingly frustrated as his timeline extended far beyond initial protection. The High Council on them began sending messages that questioned his competence. He responded by ordering more troops to the surface, refusing to accept that these primitive humans could defend him. So the resistance on Mars spread through controlled space in whispers and rumors. Enslaved species heard about the humans who fought back against their conquerors. For the first time in generations, some of them began to hope that the Dominion was not invincible. The seeds of rebellion were being planted across hundreds of worlds, watered by the blood that humanity was spilling on the red planet. Grant returned to friendly space after 3 months of raiding operation. Her ship was damaged and her crew was exhausted, but they had destroyed 14 enemy vessels. More importantly, they had proven that the supply chain was vulnerable. Admiral Grace Mitchell promoted Sophie and gave her command of a large strict force. The ghost of the asteroid belt would soon become a nightmare that the enemy could not ignore. Tate stood at the entrance to the tunnel and watched another assault fail to break through her defensive lines. She had lost half her soldiers over the past 90 days. The survivors were tired and wounded and running low on supplies, but they were still fighting. She thought about Daniel Price's message and understood exactly what he meant. Humanity would not go quietly into extinction. They would make the pay for every single life it took. Months had passed since the siege began, and Mars still refused to fall. Commander Al stood alone in his quarters and stared at the casualty reports that covered his display screen. He had lost more soldiers on this single planet than in his previous 5 conquests combined. The humans fought like cornered animals, refusing to accept the inevitable outcome of their resistance. Al had conquered species with far greater technology and number. None of them had caused him that much. Council summoned Al to answer for his failures. He appeared before them through a holographic connection, defending his strategy while enduring their criticism. Several council members suggested replacing him with a more capable commander. Others argued that the human planet was simply not worth the resources being spent on it. Al convinced them to give him more time, promising that victory was close. He needed to break the human resistance quickly, or his career would be finished. Not slept in 3 days. His eyes were red and his hands were shaking from too much coffee. But he had finally found what he was looking for. The shields that protected their ships operated on a specific energy frequency. If that frequency could be matched and disrupted, the shields would fail. Ran the calculations again and again, making sure he was correct. Then he called Admiral Grace Mitchell and told her the news that would change everything. Slid into this explanation and felt hope surge through her chest for the first time since the invasion began. She ordered every available engineer to begin retrofitting human ships with the new electromagnetic pulse technology. The modifications were not elegant, requiring bulky external emitters that made the vessels look cobbled together. But they would work. Grace gave a promotion and a medal. He thanked her quietly and went back to his laboratory to keep working. Volunteered to lead the first major counteroffensive using the new technology. He called it Operation Sunrise because they were about to show the new day was coming. His task force consisted of 23 ships, including the Defiance and several vessels that had been patched together from damaged hulls. They were still outnumbered by more than 50 to 1, but they had a weapon the enemy did not know of. The force approached the blockade around Mars under cover of a debris field left over from earlier battles, ordered his ships to spread out and select their targets carefully. They would only get one chance to prove that technology worked. If it failed, they would all die within minutes. Took a deep breath and gave the command to attack. Magnetic pulses fired simultaneously from every human ship. The effect was immediate and devastating. Shields flickered and collapsed across the blockade line. For the first time in the war, human weapons could damage any vessels directly. Shouted order as his fleet surged forward, firing everything they had at the suddenly vulnerable warships. They scrambled to respond, but their commanders had never trained for a situation where their shields simply stopped working. It lasted 4 hours and cost 7 ships, but when it was over, the blockade around Mars had been broken. 32 warships drifted dead in space, and another 50 had retreated to regroup. Watched the surviving enemy vessels flee and allowed himself a moment of fierce satisfaction. They had proven that they could be beat. Now they just had to keep doing it until the war was won. And Tate received word of the orbital victory and immediately launched a ground offensive. Her soldiers emerged from the tunnels in coordinated waves, striking at positions that had grown complacent after months of siege. The enemy was caught off guard, expecting another day of the same grinding attrition. Instead, they faced a full assault backed by air support from ships that could now operate freely above the surface. Fighting was brutal and close. Amy led from the front, personally directing attacks on fortified positions while any fire exploded around her. She lost many soldiers that day, including several officers who had been with her since the beginning. But by sunset, the forces had been put back from the main colony domes. Mars was no longer under siege. Mars was being liberated. Watched the reports come in and felt something he had never experienced before. Fear. His fleet had been humiliated by species that should have been conquered in a week. The High Council would demand his removal now. His reputation, built over centuries of conquest, was crumbling because of these stubborn, irrational humans. He ordered a full retreat from the Mars system to regroup and analyze what had happened. The Dominion needed time to understand the new human. Of the victory spread through space faster than any official communication could travel. Enslaved species heard that the humans had broken a blockade and liberated their colony. Whisper became conversation. Conversation became question. If the humans could fight back, why could others not do the same? Underground resistance movements that had been dormant for generations began to stir. The cracks in the Dominion's foundation were spreading. It held a memorial service for the soldiers who had died during Operation Sunrise and the liberation of Mars. She spoke their names aloud, honoring their sacrifice. Then she turned to the living and told them that their work was not finished. It would return with more ships and new tactics. Humanity had won a battle, but the war was far from over. They needed to prepare for the next phase while building on their momentum. Grant returned to the fleet as commander of a new strict group. She had spent the past weeks training other captains in her hit-and-run tactics. Now she had 12 ships under her command, all crewed by volunteers who wanted to take the fight to the enemy. Sophie looked at her officers and saw the same determination that burned in her own heart. They were no longer just surviving. They were fighting to win. The legendary war was entering a new chapter, and humanity intended to write it in blood. Dr. Dawson sat alone in a small meeting room aboard a diplomatic vessel drifting through neutral space. She was waiting for contact from species she had never met, responding to a message that could have been a trap. Was 53 years old, career diplomat who had negotiated treaties between hostile nations on Earth. Now she was attempting something far more dangerous. The future of humanity might depend on the conversation she was about to have. Reach out through encrypted channels that even intelligence could not detect. They were species conquered by the Dominion 2 centuries ago, reduced to servants and laborers for their alien masters, but they had never stopped hiding for freedom. When news of human resistance reached there, they decided to take an enormous risk. Their representative appeared once, a slender being with silver skin and large dark eyes that reflected deep sorrow. Adler spoke slowly, choosing words carefully in a language that was not her own. She explained that dozens of conquered species had maintained secret resistance movements for generations. They lacked the weapons and ships to challenge the Dominion directly, but they possessed something valuable: knowledge. They knew the location of supply depots and communication relays. They knew which commanders were competent and which were incompetent. They knew the weaknesses in Dominion infrastructure that they themselves had forgotten. With growing excitement as the ambassador laid out what they were offering: intelligence that would take human spies decades to gather, access to hidden networks spanning hundreds of star systems, and most importantly, hope. The conquered species had been waiting for someone to prove that they could be challenged. Humanity had provided that proof. Now they wanted to join the fight. Gray Mitchell reviewed his report with Secretary Daniel Price through a secure channel. The opportunity was extraordinary, but so were the risks. Spreading human forces across multiple star systems could leave Earth vulnerable. Trusting alien species they had never met required a leap of faith that could prove fatal. But Gray saw something else in the data: a chance to do more than simply survive. A chance to actually defeat the Dominion and free countless worlds from tyranny. Price made the decision after consulting with military and civilian advisors. Humanity would form a coalition with the conquered species. They would share technology, coordinate strategy, and fight together against their common enemy. It was the most ambitious undertaking in human history. It was also their best chance at winning a war they should have already lost. Recorded a message for the resistance, welcoming them as allies and promising that humanity would stand with them until the end. Raoul had returned to defeat the High Council in person. They stripped him of half his fleet and assigned observers to monitor his future decision, but they did not remove him from command. The Dominion had no other admiral with his experience fighting humans, and they could not afford to lose that knowledge. Al accepted the humiliation with cold fury. He requested reinforcements from the core worlds, ships that had not been deployed in centuries because they were never needed. Council granted his request. Some warships gathered at the edge of the Sol system, the largest fleet assembled in over 500 years. Al studied the tactical displays and planned his assault with meticulous care. He would not repeat his earlier mistakes. There would be no siege this time, no extended campaign that allowed humans to adapt and improvise. He would strike directly at Earth with overwhelming force, destroying there before they could organize another defense. So detected the approaching armada through long-range sensors and felt her heart sink. Even with their new technology, humanity's fleet of 120 ships could not stop 8,000 enemies. She ordered all vessels to defend positions around Earth while sending urgent messages to their new allies. The coalition had not yet had time to organize properly. Most of the promised reinforcements were still gathering at distant rendezvous points. Earth would have to hold alone until help arrived. And Sophie Grant coordinated the defense of Earth's orbital platforms. They positioned their ships to create overlapping fields of fire, hoping to inflict maximum damage before being overwhelmed. Looked at the tactical display and saw death approaching, but he refused to despair. They had surprised them before. Maybe they could do it again. He ordered his crew to battle stations and waited for the enemy to enter weapons range. It began with assault that darkened the space around Earth with weapons fire. Human ships fought desperately, using their shield-disrupting technology to destroy any vessels whenever possible. But there were simply too many targets. For every ship that fell, 3 more took its place. Watch as allied vessels explode around him. Sophie's strike group was cut off from the main fleet, fighting alone against impossible odds. The defensive line began to collapse. The sensors detected new signatures entering the system, ships that did not match any design. Dawson's voice came through the communication system, announcing that the coalition had arrived. Cruisers emerged from hyperspace, followed by vessels from the Collective and the Republic. Species that had been enslaved for centuries were finally striking back at their oppressors. Arrival of allied reinforcements changed the battle instantly. Al had expected to fight only humans, not a coordinated fleet of multiple species. His formation broke apart as new threats appeared from unexpected direction. The coalition forces were not numerous enough to win the battle outright, but they were enough to turn certain defeat into desperate stalemate. Both sides pulled back to regroup, circling each other like wounded predators. Contacted the Allied commanders and thanked them for their sacrifice. They had traveled across the galaxy to fight for a species they had never met. Many of them would not return home, but they had proven that the coalition was real. They were no longer fighting a single planet. They were fighting an alliance of the disparate, united by the hope that humanity had given them. The legendary war was about to enter its final phase. A battle for Earth came the largest military engagement in recorded galactic history. Over 12,000 ships filled the space between Earth and its moon, representing species from across hundreds of star systems. Commander Al had committed every available resource to this assault. The High Council had made their orders clear: destroy the human or do not return at all. The fate of 2 civilizations would be decided in the hours ahead. Gray Mitchell commanded the coalition force from the carrier Resolute, coordinating attacks through a communication network that linked human and alien vessels together. She had never imagined herself leading such a diverse fleet. Cruisers fought alongside human destroyers, Battleships provided cover for frigates. Species that had been enemies for generations now shared a common purpose. Grace watched the tactical display and felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on her shoulders. Led his task force directly into the heart of the formation. The Defiance had been repaired and upgraded since the liberation of Mars, but it was still outmatched by any capital ships. Did not care about the odds. He had spent his entire career preparing for a moment like this. Every maneuver he executed, every order he gave was focused on one goal: reach the enemy flagship and kill Commander Al. Cut off the head and the body would fall. Grant commanded her strike group on the Coalesce flank, protecting smaller vessels from any inner. Her ships moved like a single organism, anticipating threats before they materialized. So he had lost count of how many battles she had fought since the war began. Each one had taken something from her: friends, innocence, fear. What remained was pure determination, burning cold and steady in her chest. She would see this through to the end, no matter the cost. Recognized that the battle was not going according to plan. The Coalition force fought with a coordination that should have been impossible for such a diverse group. Human tactics combined with alien knowledge to create strategies he had never encountered. His fleet was taking heavier casualties than predicted, but he still possessed superior numbers. Victory was still achievable if he could break the enemy's will. Ordered his flagship to target population centers on Earth, hiding to force a surrender through terror. AIM Tate commanded the planetary defense grid from a bunker deep beneath the surface. She had been promoted after the liberation of Mars, given responsibility for protecting every person on Earth. The bombardment began hitting major cities despite the orbital battle rating above. Hark's team had developed shield technology that covered the largest population centers, but smaller communities were vulnerable. Amy watched casualty reports climb and forced herself to stay focused. And would not save anyone. So civilians sheltered in underground bunkers while the sky burned with falling debris. The shields protected most major cities, but the psychological impact of the attack was devastating. People held their children and prayed to whatever gods they believed in. Some cried, some screamed, but many simply sat in silence, listening to the distant thunder of weapons that would decide whether humanity survived or perished. They had done everything they could. Now they could only wait. Fort broke through the outer defensive ring around Al's flagship. He had lost half his ship reaching the point, but the remaining vessel pressed forward with suicidal determination. Sophie Grant appeared on his flank, her strike group providing cover fire that cleared a path through the enemy inner circle. She had disobeyed orders to reach him, abandoning her assigned position because she knew what was trying to do. Her voice came through the communication system, calm and steady. Finish this. And launched boarding craft toward the flagship while any weapons tore at its hull. Led the assault personally, refusing to send his soldiers in danger. He was not willing to fade himself. The Marines fought through quarters designed for beings twice their size, facing warriors who had never lost a battle on their own ship. The fighting was brutal and close. Bodies fell on both sides as the humans advanced meter by bloody meter toward the command center. The ship took critical damage protecting the boarding operation. Fire spread through her engineering section, and her crew fought desperately to contain it. She ordered non-sentinel personnel to the escape pods while she remained at her station, directing her remaining weapons at any vessel that approached the flagship. Her tactical officer begged her to evaluate. She refused, needed more time, and she would give it to him even if it cost her life. The command center and found Al waiting for him. The commander was massive, towering over the human who had caused him so much trouble. He drew a ceremonial blade that had killed dozens of enemy leaders throughout his career, raised his own weapon, a simple combat knife that seemed pathetic by comparison. The two commanders faced each other across the ruined bridge of the flagship while their fleets tore each other apart outside. Al was short and vicious. Al was stronger and fitter, his natural armor deflecting blows that should have been fatal, but had spent months fighting in every environment imaginable. He knew their weaknesses. He knew where the armor was thin. He dodged a strike that would have cut him in half and drove his blade into the soft tube beneath Al's jaw. The commander fell, his eyes wide with disbelief. The human who should have been conquered in a week had killed him instead. So Al's death spread through the fleet like a disease. Their formation broke apart as captain lost confidence in the chain of command. The Coalition force pressed their advantage, driving the enemy ships into chaotic retreat. Some vessels surrendered rather than face destruction. Others fled toward deep space, abandoning the battle that had seemed certain to succeed just hours earlier. Continued for another 2 years as conquered species rose up across the Dominion. But the Battle of Earth marked the true turning point. The empire that had terrorized the galaxy for collapsed under the weight of rebellions could no longer suppress. Humanity emerged as a founding member of the new Galactic Coalition, respected not for their technology or their numbers, but for their absolute refusal to surrender when all hope seemed lost. Grey Middle spoke at the victory ceremony held on the steps of the rebuilt United Earth government building. She honored the fallen and celebrated the living. She thanked the allied species who had risked everything to help strangers they had never met. Then she said the words that would echo through history for generations to come. They thought we would break. They learned that humans bend, but we never shatter. The crowd erupted in cheers that could be heard across the planet. Legendary war was over. Humanity had won.